Okay, I'm not sure if this one's going to be a tough one or not. Maybe. But we got to the 6-month anniversary, and I was watching PBS one day, and all of a sudden there was footage. I was just not prepared for seeing footage of planes hitting the building. I didn't realize that we were in for a barrage of media coverage of the event, and it was the 6-month anniversary of 9/11, which in itself was bizarre, but also it was, I don't know, there was something about the anniversaries, even if they were concocted by the media, where it just, I wanted to know more. I'd been really hung up on Aaron's kind of last moments and what he must have experienced. Obviously, he would have been terrified. Did he consider jumping? I don't think he would have jumped. But I also know people sometimes, I don't think they had a choice if they were close to the windows trying to breathe. Just, all the horrific stuff just kept going through my mind. And in fact, it continued to go through my mind for years after. It wasn't until I actually got into a writing class. We had an assignment in the writing class. It was a memoir writing class. We had an assignment to write a scene of something we had imagined. Like, we couldn't obviously have been there, so we would have to imagine what might have happened. And obviously it was to tie into our story, and I was writing about this. And so I actually wrote a scene of Aaron's last moments. And it was really, as hard as it was actually really cathartic to do. And that kind of got me through the hump, I guess, of all those years of like dwelling on his last moments. So anyhow, we, Selena, Aaron's mom, and I talked a lot. Like, she was like not going to watch any of the coverage. And it was sort of our first foray into this, like the first time it's really dawning on us that we're going to be confronted with this footage over and over and over again, whether we like it or not. And it does. It just, every time I see it, it brings this up, like, what was he doing? What was he thinking? Who was he talking to? What were they saying? All of that. What were they trying to do? This continues to this day, every year, years and years on. I mean, it's sort of a double-edged sword. On one hand, I mean, I feel like I'm kind of used to it now, so it doesn't really bother me that much anymore. But still, I don't tend to watch the media on that day, on the anniversary. What's nice about it is that I actually hear from people. I hear from people every year, so it's kind of a nice kind of, everybody kind of remembers me specifically on that day, which is a little bit weird for me because I don't believe it or not, I'm not that public a person. I'm pretty shy. So anyway, a couple of French filmmakers had captured moments that really hadn't been seen before, and they made it into a documentary. And so there was this debate. So should I, shouldn't I watch the documentary? In the end, I watched it, as hard as that was. And so much played out in terms of what we kind of thought about the building and how it had fallen and all the conspiracy theories. As I said, my dad had already explained to me that, the building did is exactly as it was designed to do, which was to basically pancake so that it wouldn't destroy blocks of New York City. So the other devastating thing about watching that documentary was they were following the firefighters, and it became pretty clear pretty quickly that the firefighters had, as a viewer watching it on TV, we had more information about what was happening to the building than they did, and because they were inside the building, and they had made the command post in one of the buildings, which ultimately fell down. It was beyond anything that they were kind of trained for. And, of course, we later learned, radios didn't work, and there was lack of communication, and They made the fatal error of putting the command center in, I can't remember now which building it was, 7? Anyway, it was hard to watch because it was frustrating, you know. It was, I like knowing so many of those guys just ran into the building thinking that, you know, not realizing, like I could tell as soon as the plane hit the building, like I saw it, I could tell that the building had to have been unstable, and that if they had known that, if any of them had watched it from the television screen, they would have not been running up that building. I'm sure of it. They would have come up with, I don't know what, but they would have cleared the area, I think. For me, that was really hard to watch, just because it was just such an extraordinary situation that nobody could have anticipated. So this is kind of where the anger came in again, because it just made me so frustrated that doors were locked, stairwells were blocked. We found out later that one of the reasons the stairwells were blocked was because they had been lined in drywall, which they weren't supposed to do. And we heard from one of our architect friends that when they were building the building, two unions that didn't get along, and so I don't quite understand what happened, but with the impact of the plane hitting, the drywall fell off a lot of the walls, and so it was blocking the stairways. So it was kind of one of the reasons why the stairways were blocked and why people couldn't run down. And as well, doors to the roof were locked. Not that it would have helped them had they gotten up there, but it was just things like that. Just all these things. It kind of brings back the anxiousness and the anger. And weirdly, at this time, I was still kind of considering it almost like a natural disaster. It was like an earthquake or something. And so even then, I didn't know who to be angry at. You know, irrationally, I was angry at Aaron for being there. I was angry at New York City for building such a big building and being such a target, I guess. I don't even know. It's completely irrational. Osama bin Laden is who I probably should have been angry with, but in the end, he was just such a remote character. Like, it was easier to be angry at New York City somehow. I don't know. It was so illogical, but that is kind of that's kind of how it goes. I've talked to many widows, and often the anger is at a nurse who did something random that made them really angry, or they're angry at the system, or they're angry at a doctor who didn't perform something that they thought was crucial, that kind of thing. So it's pretty common. You want to blame someone. As irrational as it is, it's part of this whole, like, you're still coming to terms with it, coming to grips with it. So I think that's all part of it. So there was something about that 6-month anniversary and watching that documentary that, kind of brought me back, kind of regressed me a little bit. It was probably not really the best idea. And we were coming into kind of spring at this point. And I remember a few weeks after seeing the documentary and being at work and looking out the window and noticing for the first time, like, colors. It was like all of a sudden the world went from gray to color. It was the most bizarre experience. And I think it was just something about that kind of experience jolted me. And I felt like I kind of had woken up a little bit. And I really didn't want to wake up. I was quite happy being kind of numb and inured to everything that was going on. So it was quite a shock to realize I was in a colorful world again. Now I had to figure things out in a big way.